All right, ladies and gentlemen, did you hear the one about the election in Iran? But no, I'm serious. Welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. The Iranian people did come out and vote for a new president. The question is, does it matter who the president of Iran is? Also, did you hear that the Iranian government is sending 6,000 more fighters to Syria to help prop up Assad's regime? That's in addition to the fighters already there, and Hezbollah, which is an arm of the government of Iran. So here to sort all of this out and explain all of this to us, there's nobody I'd rather turn to talk about Iran, and that is Ilan Berman. He's vice president of the American Foreign Policy Council. Ilan, great to see you.
Great to be here.
I called Ilan, who's usually in Washington. Just move the mic a little closer to yourself.
Absolutely.
And I said, could you come on today? Skype or phone is fine. And he said, I'm going to be across the street from you. So here he is.
That's great. Great to pop by.
Great to see you. We've done a lot together over the years. Okay, so talk about the election. They say a more moderate candidate won. Talk about that and answer the question, I guess, does it matter?
Well, those are two separate questions.
Yeah.
Both, I think, completely accurate and relevant to ask. So first of all, not so much an election as a selection. For the simple reason that Iran, on paper, looks an awful lot like the United States does in terms of having a separation of powers, having a judiciary, an executive, a legislative branch. But what Iran has that we don't have is a set of clerical, religious institutions that overlay the Republican ones. And those are the ones that really call the shots. And the way it looks is something like this. In the run-up to Friday's election in Iran, before the Guardian Council, which is the regime's government oversight body, stepped in and ruled, there were more than 700 applicants to be president of Iran. The Guardian Council ruled in late May. Turned out there were only 8 that were approved.
Right.
All 8 of them, they may sing a different tune, but they march to the beat of the same drummer.
Cloth because they're approved by the same people.
Exactly right, and also because they're all of them, whether they're deemed moderate here in the West or conservative here in the West, they're all share the same characteristic of being very much beholden to Khomeiniism, the idea of the Islamic Republic as a revolutionary state, as an expansionist state, as an ideological construct. And the current president, the new president, Hassan Rouhani, is no different. Everybody calls him a moderate.
Right.
Even the Wall Street Journal today came out and talked about him as a moderate. What they didn't talk about so much in the Wall Street Journal piece and in any of the others is the fact that he was one of Khomeini's original revolutionaries. He was in the Shah's Iran agitating for an Islamic revolution until it got so hot for him that he decided to get a PhD in Scotland, and then he joined Khomeini in Paris. When
he wasn't a hostage taker then, like allegedly Ahmadinejad
He was not. He was actually the PhD came later. It was in the 90s when he was sort of moonlighting. But nonetheless, he did travel to the West, to Europe. He left Iran, traveled to Europe, and ended up in the inner circle of Khomeini. And when Khomeini came back to Iran to have...
and Khomeini's the Ayatollah.
The Ayatollah, the revolutionary in chief, if you will. The one that created the Islamic Republic, when he came in, when he had a successful revolution, for the 25 years thereafter, Hassan Rouhani occupied a whole series of government posts. He was a member of their legislature. He was the deputy chairman of the legislature. He ended up a few years ago as the secretary of their National Security Council. So this is a G-man.
So is this a game?
Clearly.
Yeah. So is this a game that they play over there, and they portray this guy as a moderate? I mean, because how moderate could he be? And you're describing a guy who's towed the party line and had served with the Ayatollah for the Ayatollah, was stamped by the committee that stamps the candidate. So how much of a moderate could he be?
Well, not very.
Yeah.
I mean, moderate in comparative terms. And so if you
compared to Ahmadinejad,
absolutely.
Right.
So what you're going to expect, I think what you can expect to see out of Iran now is there's going to be a lot softer diplomatic rhetoric. In fact, a lot of the candidates in the run-up to the current election were talking about how Ahmadinejad was damaging because he was drawing a lot of diplomatic heat. A lot of them, Rafsanjani, who was the former president who actually got disqualified, his main complaint about what Ahmadinejad...
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, well, not really.
You knew that was coming.
Not really, yeah. The way he conducted business was the fact that Rafsanjani would say, on my watch, the nuclear program progressed, but it progressed a lot more quickly and a lot more smoothly because I didn't talk about it.
Right.
So Hassan Rouhani is, I think, very much the same thing. Rouhani, from 2003 until 2005, was actually the Iranian regime's chief nuclear negotiator with the West. Remember, that was the time when the Europeans, the EU3, France, Great Britain, and Germany tried desperately to do everything in their power to convince Iran not to pursue.
Yeah.
And Rouhani, afterwards, in his memoirs, talked, I think, very candidly about the fact that, you know, the Europeans wanted to stave off conflict so much that this was a great boon for us.
Right.
We could negotiate and draw out the time until an additional round of sanctions was levied and buy time for a nuclear project.
Yeah, and that's what they've been doing, except that you're right, that Ahmadinejad, with his whole persona and pronouncements, has made it that much more difficult. We're talking to Ilan Berman, Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Okay, so everything stays basically status quo. What happens to Ahmadinejad? Is he just gone? I mean,
well, yes, but payback is terrible. And so actually today, just before I came into the studio, I was reading the news out of...
You saw him in Bryant Park?
No, I didn't see him in Bryant Park. But the news out of the Guardian
Yeah.
or the Globe and Mail or what have you, some British newspaper, was that Ahmadinejad has actually been brought up on unspecified charges.
Really?
Before criminal court in Tehran.
For wearing that members-only jacket every day of his term?
But I can tell you that it actually gets to sort of scratches a deeper itch on the part of the clerical regime, because what you've seen over the last couple of years has been the fact that Ahmadinejad, even though he's radical and he's revolutionary, was actually towing a very populist line. He criticized the supreme leader a great deal about the handling of the economy, about subsidies, about all these different things that are essentially sacred cows in Iran.
Right.
And so now that there's no immunity, and this was really the key to watch, if Ahmadinejad was still in the good graces of the Ayatollahs, he would have received immunity before he left office. He didn't receive immunity.
Yeah.
And as a result, now he's going to be facing, you know, 1, 2, maybe many trials, because all the political chickens are going to come home to roost.
You think he'll go to jail?
He might. I mean, stranger things have happened. If you look at the former prime minister of Ukraine, who's now languishing in prison, it could happen.
All right. But one more question on this before we move to Syria. So nothing changes.
And this is a good question. No, I think the rhetoric changes a great deal.
Okay, but nothing in policy, in fact.
Nothing in policy, because, well, for two reasons. One is, rhetorically speaking, you're going to see a softer line out of Tehran. You're going to see in Washington a tremendous amount of energy being expended on trying to figure out whether this guy is really, you know, the one we've been searching for.
This guy might even go to lunch with Obama.
He might.
But nothing will change.
He might, but nothing will change because for a very simple, exactly right, for a very simple reason. And so this is a really good metric when you think about Iranian politics. Iran has a post of supreme leader. He's in charge. That's why he's called the supreme leader. And he's the one that controls the nuclear file. And so the president can influence it somewhat. Ahmadinejad certainly did.
Right.
But he can't actually steer the course of the regime's nuclear effort. It's much broader than one person, one political office.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on to Syria. Of course, the Soviets involved now, or the Russians, I should say, involved, and Putin and Obama talking today. Iran's involvement in Syria, how much does it? How much of a problem does it present? Because it's Iran and it's Russia and Syrian's president against the rebels, who are, of course, Al Qaeda to an extent, again, and the rest of the world. So where are we going here?
Well, I think it's a huge problem, and what you're looking at in Syria is essentially the new battleground by which all these sectarian tensions in the Middle East are coming to a fore. On the one side, you see the Syrian regime and the Shiite crescent, right? Hezbollah and Iran and sort of other parties aligned with it. On the other side, you see the Gulf monarchies, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, others, the Gulf Cooperation Council states. This is essentially in danger of becoming a battlefield for where that tug-of-war that we saw during the civil war in Iraq begins to play out again. It's not so much now about the Assad regime. It is about Iranian influence. It's about sort of the ascent of Hezbollah. The good news for us, I think, is that both sides seem to be losing pretty badly. Henry Kissinger sort of famously said during the Iran-Iraq war that it's a real shame that that one side will definitely win and one side will lose.
And Sarah Palin said famously the other day, "Let Allah take care of it."
Perhaps, but it gets to, I think, to an important point, which is that what's happening in Syria is long past the moment of diminishing returns.
Right.
The administration has now weighed in and begun talking about seriously arming the rebels.
Which
right
is
now,
another thing I want to talk to you about, but yeah.
Right now they're talking about small arms, but you know this conversation may escalate to be larger arms.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that when you choose not to decide, as we've chosen not to decide for the last year, you've also made a choice.
Right.
And we chose to allow other people, like Iran, like Russia, like Saudi Arabia, to influence events on the ground in Syria. Now we're intervening, but there's not a lot of clarity about what our desired outcome is.
No.
The battlefield, I think there was a report in some of the British press yesterday that 7 of 9 Syrian opposition groups are Islamist or Islamist
It's insane.
And so the problem is, the Hippocratic oath that doctors always take is, whatever you do
no harm.
do no harm.
Yep.
So the real question has to be measured against that. We may feel a compulsion to do something, but it's far from clear that we're actually going to make matters better.
Well, I think this is a diversion from the scandals, because to say all of a sudden on Friday of last week or whenever it was, or Thursday, the red line's been crossed, when we've had report after report for months and months of chemical weapons certainly being moved, being used by the rebels, by the Assad regime. France came out and said it. The UN came out and said it. Other reports have said Israel said it. And then all of a sudden one day, hey, guess what? Obama's red line has been crossed, when he's constantly moved that red line. To skeptics like me, this is wagging the dog.
Well, it might be, for sure. It might also be checking a box, because the administration, and particularly you see this in the latest round of appointments, the appointments of Susan Rice as the new National Security Advisor.
And Samantha Power.
Samantha Power, especially as the UN ambassador.
Rights, yeah.
Right. She's pioneered this concept of responsibility to protect, essentially. Humanitarian intervention, not just intervention.
Well, yeah.
And that's important because there is a plurality of opinion in the Obama administration. Some people say, stay out of it, let them fight it out, it's great.
Right.
Some people say, let's intervene. The pendulum seems to be swinging in favor of the people that say that we have to intervene. But when we do, I think it's going to be very clear that the Obama administration is going to try to do just enough to mollify those critics, but not enough to really commit ourselves long term. Because I think, if nothing else, the Obama administration is worried about this sort of open-ended conflict that drags on because it was such a vociferous critic of what we did in Iraq.
Do you think, when you look at things, that Barack Obama has managed to put the Muslim Brotherhood in charge in Libya, Egypt, and now is supporting a combination of the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda here in Iran and in Syria? Isn't it kind of frightening?
Very frightening. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's...
You don't?
No,
okay.
I don't. Look, Occam's razor tends to cut in the direction of incompetence much more than in the direction of conspiracy. No, when you look at sort of what's happening, I think it's very clear from this administration's ham-fisted approach to the Middle East is they just want to be part of the conversation. They don't want to tell the Egyptians how to run their government. They just want to be part of the conversation.
Well, they did when it was Mubarak.
Exactly right, but not now.
Yeah.
And the same thing...
Well, but that, to me, that's no coincidence.
Perhaps so. I don't know. My sense is that it's very easy to say what you're against. It's much harder to say what you're for.
Right.
And so the administration, I think, was very clear about we don't want a strongman, we don't want autocracy. They're very less settled about what actually is a desirable outcome in the Middle East.
True.
And that defines everything from Syria all the way down to North Africa.
Yeah, well, we know that Samantha Power has no love for Israel, Susan Rice has no love for Israel, and in my opinion, Barack Obama has